Hello, and welcome back to this video series on A Course in Miracles, where we're well over 300 videos into the process. And I'm called to say a few words about endings today. We tend to think, and we're covering, of course, the workbook for students, though there are dozens of other videos, either introductory videos or interviews that I've done, especially during the early parts of this video series, which was a live stream on Enlightened World Network. Now, you may be joining me from Enlightened World Network's YouTube channel, where these videos still appear. We decided several months ago that we were going to pre-record them, and yeah, it's been both ways, actually. It's been an honor for me to be here with you. And it's not ending. We're talking about the latter part of the workbook for students here, which famously has 365 lessons or ideas for contemplation. So technically, if one were to want to do it this way, you could go through and start at lesson 1, and exactly 1 year later, having done a lesson every day, finish. But what does that actually mean? Finish, end, right? This is where I want to talk about endings. It's the beginning, isn't it? I have been through the workbook myself several times, and I know certainly that some of you have too. Many of you have likely done it more times than I have. So you know that it's a lot like watching a movie for a second time, for a third time, or reading a beautiful novel, right? Your favorite novel for a second reading. Yeah, a third or more than that even. Every time you deepen your understanding, and the workbook is no different. I can tell you that from personal experience, that it never truly ends. We learn the lessons that we're to learn on each and every given day. And should you choose, having gone through all of this once, to do it again, then that would be beautiful. And if you're called to do that, I'm sure you'll know that. You know. So this video series is going to continue after we finish lesson 365. I can tell you that much. We've still got the manual for teachers. We've got the text to talk about. And yeah, who knows? Who knows? The process is just unfolding constantly. So thank you for tuning in and for subscribing to either of these YouTube channels. In fact, while I'm pitching it, you might want to subscribe to both Enlightened World Network and my own Tomas Garza. Yeah, thank you for doing that. And thank you above all for your effort and your own practice and your investment in awakening. It benefits all of us. So my deepest thanks to you for that. All right, so we're in part 2 of the workbook, having just talked about lesson 290 in the last video. And before we get to lesson 291, we're going to talk today about section 8 of part 2 of the workbook, which is, what is the real world? You'll remember part 2 of the workbook has a contemplative question. What is sin? What is the ego? What is the Holy Spirit? This one, section 8, which is meant to serve as the backdrop for the next 10 lessons, lessons 291 to 300 in the workbook. It's, what is the real world? So I absolutely invite you and encourage you to read the 5 paragraphs of commentary that the course sets down for us here. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So why don't we hit the highlights now? The real world. Well, all right. So I went to college in the 90s. The real world. You may or may not have ever heard of the MTV reality series, The Real World. The Real World San Diego, right? The Real World New York, Real World Austin. Yeah, Real World Chicago. The Real World. It was on TV. Real World? What? Yeah, and I can remember watching that. What it is it's a reality show, and if you don't know what it is, you can always Google it. That's not the real world we're talking about, where they put a bunch of strangers in the house and invent a psychodrama for them to get involved in for ratings. I mean, of course, because, TV ratings. Manufactured psychodrama. So-and-so is going to get in a fight with so-and-so. Somebody's going to hook up with somebody. Somebody's going to be jealous. And someone's going to have a threesome. Stuff like that. This is not the real world that we're talking about. Instead, the course refers to the real world as the world that is forgiven, as the world that we see when we've forgiven everything, including our own mind. The real world it's a symbol, like all of perception. That does mean that it is an illusion, like all of perception. And here's the difference. The real world is the world that we look upon when we have forgiven completely, totally. Another way of saying this is it is the world that forgiveness shows us. It's the world that love shows us, of only love. Love looking upon itself. In other words, there are no images anymore of war. There is no strife, no struggle, no suffering, no pitched battle of any kind. It's gone. We no longer perceive it. This is the world that forgiveness shows us. The Course refers to it as the real world. And it also promises us that it's not going to last, because when we have forgiven completely, when we see only the world that forgiveness and love show us, in other words, the real world, God takes the final step himself, meaning instantly, right then and there, we are home, so to speak, home in God, as one with our Creator. This is the goal, the peace of God. And as always, with A Course in Miracles, forgiveness is how you do it. It's how it plays out, right? This is how the Holy Spirit rolls. And Jesus too. Yeah. So when the Course refers to the real world, this is what we're talking about here. Reality, our identity, God, is beyond all concepts, so it's beyond perception. The real world, is as close as perception can take us to complete awakening. We reach it, so to speak, and God takes the final step himself, instantly. And that's the goal. So yeah, it's some uplifting and beautiful language here in the course. Again, this is section 8 between lessons 290 and 291 in the workbook for students. Depending on the page number will vary depending on which edition of the course you're looking at or whether you're looking at it online. It's section 8. What is the real world? And as always, I invite you to read, and you may want to reread. It's really beautiful, it's uplifting, and it's where we're all headed. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now, today, in the present moment, we are all headed for this place. Why can we say this definitively? It's who we are. Thank you for joining me.